Years ago to introduce the Look East policy. 2 nights ago, Japan nicknamed the Samurai Blue lost to Croatia on penalties, which effectively denied it a place in the quarterfinals of the ongoing World Cup in Qatar. It would have been a truly devastating loss for the host Japanese fans who had traveled to Qatar, and especially after witnessing their team beat the likes of pedigreed Germany and Spain in the group stage. To the personal grief for or sadness and remain steadfast to their value system. Are some of the values that I wanted to be embraced by Malaysians when the Look East policy was formulated and introduced. Ladies and gentlemen, when I introduced the Look East policy as part of our national policy in December 1981, I was only in the 5th month of my prime ministership. But the seeds of the policy had already started growing in me some 20 years earlier. In 1961, when I visited Japan for the first time with my wife, I saw the ongoing construction of the Metropolitan Expressway in the city of Tokyo in preparation for the Olympics. What was amazing was the rate of development that Japan was experiencing. And it occurred not too long after Japan had suffered massive devastation from war. I've said this before, and I will say it again. I concluded that the recovery of Japan is very much attributed to the Japanese culture and values. Their discipline, hard-working attitude, and commitment to responsibility, and most of all, their deep sense of shame if they fail in their duty. In the Japan of today, the deep sense of shame is still an integral part of the Japanese way of life. Another story regarding shame and honor that is worth repeating is how Japanese railway staff would perform a mass apology ceremony to ease passengers if the train is late even by a few minutes. When I became the Prime Minister, I believe that if Malaysians have the same attitude, ethics, and work culture, alongside the sense of pride in their work and sense of shame when failing, we would be as successful as the Japanese. It was, however, not an easy task, as Malaysia, like any other former colonies of the European nations, tended to be more accustomed to treating the Western culture as superior. Though it was not easy to supplant the culture of the former colonialists, we have managed to some degree to successfully promote the policy. Our students and workforce sent to Japan upon their return were testimony of this success, and that the work ethics they adopted were worthy to be emulated by fellow Malaysians. Of course, the policy would not have been successful without the support and cooperation of the Japanese government. The Look East policy has been one of the cornerstones of Malaysia-Japan relations. Throughout the years, Japan had assisted Malaysia tremendously in its economic development endeavors. Japan helped Malaysia build many of its world-class infrastructure, transferred technical knowledge, and extended a helping hand during the financial crisis of 1997 and recent pandemic. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is now 4 decades since the policy was introduced, and I believe it is still a good and relevant policy for Malaysia and for Malaysians. After I stepped down in 2003, during my first stint as the Prime Minister, subsequent Malaysian governments after me continued to support the policy, though the emphasis was not as strong. During my second stint as Prime Minister, I was focused on the revitalization of the policy. The late Prime Minister Abe Shinzo and I had then agreed that the framework for the Look East Policy 2.0 must incorporate new trends in bilateral cooperation in order to remain relevant. Ladies and gentlemen, new global developments, in particular the maturing rise of China, both as economic and military power, and the hostile reaction to this by the United States, had impacted many of our foreign policies and international relations. ASEAN faces a threat to its centrality and subsequently its relevancy from both external and internal forces. Malaysia and Japan perceive the threats from these new realities differently. China's rise caused greater concern in Japan, leading it to align itself closer to the United States. Meanwhile, China's growing prominence within the Southeast Asian region to overshadow Japan's presence. Rather than integration and cooperation, the region is increasingly being divisive, pushed to choose sides. It is important for Malaysia and Japan not to lose sight of its long-standing good relations. Albeit, despite these new challenges and uncertainties, I personally and sincerely hope and that the people-to-people interaction within the Malaysians and Japanese people would blossom and into a strong and enduring bond, and that it will be the glue that binds our two nations together. Before I end my speech, I wish to thank ISIS, Malaysia, who followed me. They all said that they will continue with the policy. But of course things have changed. Today doing business is not the same as it was 40 years ago. Today we have new technologies, we have better communication, we have better ways of communicating with each other without even meeting each other. We can do that on the line, and many of the businesses are carried out not in the usual way of going to a place to buy things, but merely by making the order online, and the things will be delivered to your home, which means that the shops are no longer needed. So this is a new way of doing business, and it has been shown that this new way has expanded business to such an extent that in 1 minute, 1 billion deals can be carried out. This is what we are seeing today. So both Malaysia and Japan must adopt this new system and develop new relations between the companies in Japan and the companies in Malaysia. But to do this, we need government support. If the government is very aggressive and positive about relations between Malaysia and Japan, I'm quite sure that Malaysia and Japan will benefit even more from the Look East policy than before. I thank you. With you that we should not confine the Look East policy to Malaysia alone. It has benefited Malaysia, and it can benefit many other countries. The most important thing about the Look East policy is not the investment, it is about the culture and the value system of the Japanese, which accounts for their success. I believe that the culture of the people is what distinguishes people, not the color of the skin, not the location, not the geographical background, but the culture. If the culture is right, they succeed. If the culture is wrong, they fail. So the Japanese culture appears to have given Japan the kind of push that has enabled Japan very early to emulate the Western countries and their system and to benefit from that. So Japan looked west initially, but then Japan developed its own culture, which is far better than the Western culture. And we, having distinguished between Eastern and Western cultures, feel that the Eastern cultures has certain advantages, certain factors which enable Eastern countries to not only catch up with the West, but also exceed the performance of the West. So if we can spread elements of the Japanese culture, in particular the sense of shame, I think many countries will benefit. Today we find that people have lost the sense of shame. Unfortunately, even in Malaysia, where you can do anything that is criminal even, but people do not feel a sense of shame. We find in Malaysia today a lack of sense of shame to the extent that we are willing to kiss the hands of criminals. So that is going to destroy the development of this country, because I believe that it is the culture of the people, not the color of the skin or the background, other background, but the culture. If it includes a sense of shame, Malaysia will be able to recover, and so will other countries if they adopt this special value system of the Japanese. Thank you. Very much with your view. When you have time on your hand, use the time for doing something. I have been asked by many people, how is it that you became quite active at this late age? I believe that being active is very important. Active not only in terms of your physical self, but also your mental self. If you don't read, you don't write, you don't argue, you don't debate, the brain recedes. It goes into recession and you forget things. But if you keep on reading a lot, writing, talking to people, debating, and making decisions and all that, then the brain is active. And when it is active, I don't think you would lose control over your whole self. So it is important that when you have time, as you were forced to during the pandemic, you have a lot of time doing nothing, but you can always find something to do. I have not been carving wood for a long time. It was not a great success with me, but as you know, I write, I read, I become very active, even politically. Lots of people say it's about time that I rest, but I think if I rest, I will just, fluctuate. So I would say that the best medicine is active, to be active. Be active both physically and mentally, and you will remain relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
What kind of value system you should have? Having determined that, how do you change the value system of a community. It's very difficult with people who are old because their way of life has become calcified, fixed to the extent that they cannot change. So if we want to change the performance of anybody, even a whole country or certain races, you must begin when they were very young. In fact, I think the Japanese started instilling their values when the child is only 3 years old. When you begin very early, it becomes implanted in the thinking of the individual or the country or the people that even when they age, they become older, they will cling to the value system they were instilled with when they were young. So I wanted to be Minister of Education the second time I had the chance to become Prime Minister. But they told me that the Prime Minister has promised not to take on any other job except that of a Prime Minister. So I had to give up the idea of to review and change the education system. But later on, I had occasion to sort of dismiss the Minister of Education, and I became Minister of Education temporarily. During that time, I tried to change the education system. Unfortunately, before I could achieve anything, I was practically booted out of the Prime Ministership. But if we want to do something about changing the future of a people, the best time to start is when you are very young. Even at the kindergarten stage, implant in them good values. Tell them, don't take what doesn't belong to you. Because when they grow old, they will think twice before they take something that doesn't belong to them. In other words, they don't steal anymore. Of course, corruption should be instilled in every person, because corruption is what is going to destroy people, destroy countries, destroy our civilization. Thank you.
Thank you too.
We cannot send too many students there because it costs a lot of money. Although the yen today has depreciated even against the ringgit. So now I think we should send a lot more.
Jepun yang pernah berada di Malaysia selama 18 tahun. Saya ingin meletakkan sedikit terima kasih kepada Tun Dr. Mahathir. Saya sebenarnya buat saya punya master, peringkat master, saya menulis tesis dalam bahasa Melayu tentang sejarah ekonomi Johor. Then I wrote the thesis on PhD on Singapore economic laws in University Malaya as well. So selepas dapat PhD, saya pulang ke Jepun. Then I'm teaching some courses related to economics in Japanese university. My mission when I return to Japan, my personal mission is bringing students to Malaysia, because I'm a product of Malaysia, right? So I was personally thinking that bringing students, a Japanese student to Malaysia, I can see a remarkable change of Japanese students in Malaysia. It's a very short-term program organized, including pre-departure study session. They learn many new things about Malaysia, unity in the harmonious condition, ethnic relations. Those things are very new to us. Islamic religions, halal products, those are very new. So in this respect, I believe, I think two-way flow is, I believe, strong. This very important. In this respect, I would like to seek the advice how to enhance the flow from Japanese youth to studying in Malaysia. I'd be very grateful if you, Dr. Mahathir, kindly share your view. Thank you very much.
We should have a Japanese university in Malaysia. The Americans have, the Australians have universities in Malaysia. The British have many universities, branch universities in Malaysia. And because Malaysia is relatively cheap, lots more people from many poorer countries can get a good education in Malaysia. But in the Malaysia, if you go to Indonesia, whether you like it or not, you soon become fluent in the Indonesian language. But you cannot do that in Malaysia, because Malaysians believe foreigners cannot speak their language. So if you come and speak in Malay to a Malaysian, he will reply in English. Because he assumes that you cannot understand my language. You must be able to speak, understand English better. That is one thing about Malaysians, that people who work here, live here for a long time. In fact, we have people who are Malaysian citizens who cannot speak Bahasa Malaysia. Say is good about Malaysia is that we can have an election with no violence. There's no violence. We accept the result. Yes, we are not happy with a lot of wrong things which were done, like corruption and all that. But it did not result in violence, in killing people. But in many countries, elections mean people would be killed. And after the results are announced, there would be a demonstration accusing the winner of cheating. Doesn't matter who the winner is, the winner will be accused of cheating. But in Malaysia, we know there's a lot of cheating done, but we have not become violent. That is something that I think a lot of other countries can learn from Malaysia. The Islam in Malaysia. We are not against other religion. That is in accordance with the teachings of the religion of Islam. That you have to accept that there are people of other religion whose practices are different from yours. To them, their religion, to us, our religion. They can do what they think is the right thing, and we can do what we think is the right thing. So we can tolerate people of different religions in Malaysia more than in many other countries. Yes, there is a tendency towards extremism, but so far we have not really exploded into violence that you see in many countries. So if the Japanese students were to come here, among the things that they would learn is that number one, we are not a violent people. Number two, that Islam in Malaysia is a tolerant Islam. It is actually the true teachings of Islam. So then you will not have that unfair unfair regard for Islam and the Muslim. We are not violent. There are other religions too can burst out into violence, but it is not exclusively among the Muslims. And in Malaysia, we have that. So that is those are two things that you can learn from Malaysia. So I would welcome more Japanese students to come to study like you in Malaysia and to speak as fluently as you speak Malay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tun.
The current powers in the world. China may try to replace the number one country in this world. And that is not something that the number one country welcomes. And they would like us also not to welcome. But I have been to Japan every year to speak at the Nikkei conference on the future of the world. Among the things that I keep on repeating to them is that when you fight a war and the war ends, that's the time to make peace. When you see what happens in Europe, there was a war against Germany. The whole of Europe was against Germany. But when the war ended, the British and the French have become good friends of Germany. They forget about the atrocities committed by the Germans, and I think by the French and the British also. We also see that in Japan, the Americans dropped 2 atom bombs on Japan. And yet after the war, Japan and America are good friends. So I don't see why we cannot forget the past and think about the present and the future. What if both Japan and China decide that to be friends again, and stop building up huge arms race and all that. Stop that, because it's a waste of money. When you build a powerful military force, you want to test it, and then it can break out into a war, and maybe the war will become a world war. So I suggested that if you can be friendly, Japan can be friendly with America, why not Japan, Korea, be friendly with China? Yes, of course China wants to expand, but we can negotiate. I believe that war is very primitive. You solve problems by killing people, and you call yourself civilized people.
Yes.
What would happen if I don't like you? I just take a gun and spray some bullets because I don't like you. This happens in America. But if we negotiate, nobody is killed, nothing is destroyed. But you look at what's happening now in Ukraine. Thousands of people, both soldiers and civilians, are killed, not only among the Ukrainians, but also among the Russians, and the whole country is destroyed. You can see it on TV every day. And yet, I believe, even if it stops, the winner doesn't get anything, the loser also will not get anything. And the cost of rebuilding would be tremendous. It will run into $3 trillion at this moment. So why waste time when you end the war and you cannot even get anything out of it except to have to spend money? But if you would negotiate or arbitrate or go to a court of law and decide the claim, whether it is, well, in a war you may win, you may lose. But in negotiation also you may win and you may lose. But there will be no cost. So I believe that we should find a modus operandi with China, a growing China. You can't stop China from growing because they are a very hard-working people, very diligent, very skillful people. They're sending people to the moon. They can do whatever other people can do. So let's tolerate this phase during the development of China. I think leadership is very important. Some leaders are very nice, some leaders are not nice. The German people are among the most cultured people in the world, and yet they produce Hitler, a man who started a world war. So we have to tolerate. Malaysia tolerated China for 2,000 years. We have had relations with China, but China never conquered Malaysia. The Portuguese came to Malaysia in 1509. 2 years later, they came and they captured Malacca. Who should we be afraid of? China or Portuguese? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good.